Non-duality can be very confusing for people, so this video is hopefully going to clarify some things that you may have heard non-dual speakers say. Let me first point out that the arrows up here, they're intended to be pointing in all directions because non-duality is truly all-inclusive. It doesn't exclude a single thing. We normally think of reality as comprised of separate things that we can objectify and know. Now, non-duality is ultimately ineffable. There isn't really a thing called non-duality or the non-dual or the absolute. These words are pointing to something which itself is unobjectifiable. So we have to first acknowledge that the words out here are just pointings. They're not claims in and of themselves that they are the absolute truth. At least not exclusively. So everything is ultimately ineffable. You can't really grasp anything. And when I say that, what I mean is essentially that whenever you look at a tree, that thing that you're calling a tree, it's not absolutely a tree. And this is common sense. A tree is just a word that we associate with that phenomena so that we can use the language to express things to other people. So we can reference that appearance with the word tree, and it's not absolutely that word tree, but the thing that we're pointing to with that word, it's not even a thing in and of itself. It's not separate from its environment. It is the non-dual appearing as that particular distinction. What the mind has the habit of doing is it creates divisions between distinctions. And even if we can grant that that appearance isn't absolutely a tree, the mind still can't help but to think of it as a separate thing. Even though it's nameless, it still asserts that there's a separate thing there that is nameless. There isn't really. The non-dual is so all-inclusive that things don't actually exist. There isn't anything that's objectifiable. There isn't any divisionary line to be found. We only arbitrarily delineate lines between things. And then the words that we impose onto those distinctions, they further perpetuate the notion that they absolutely are separate. As soon as you call something a tree, that reinforces the notion that there is a separate thing there. There is no separation whatsoever, though. The conceptual domain here is what reifies the illusion of duality. So you say that I am me. There's a me here, and it's obviously or apparently not anyone else or anything else. There is something exclusive about the me that you may call yourself. That me, though, is only a concept. There isn't really a separate person somehow behind the experience that is then referred to by that word me. There simply isn't a separate person there. All that arises is the concept of a me, and it may be associated with particular distinctions, but none of those distinctions are absolutely separated from anything else. So the non-dual is appearing as quite literally everything, and the distinctions that we can point to and call all of these various words, they're only relevant within that conceptual domain itself. Whenever we attempt to point to absolute reality, which obviously isn't that concept, but that which is ultimately ineffable, when we attempt to point to that, none of the concepts that we could use are relevant. Their relevance is sort of boxed in to this cloud of knowing. So the divisionary lines between things only have apparent existence within that conceptual domain. As soon as you go outside of the thoughts, outside of the conceptual domain, there's just obviously what is, and it's whole and complete. It's undivided. Division only appears within the conceptual domain. So that's why none of this is actually relevant to non-duality, because these concepts don't have intrinsic standalone existence. They only appear within the non-dual. So they're relevant as appearances, but they're not relevant as things that exist in and of themselves that have standalone existence. And this is why the most pure teaching or pointing to non-duality is silence. However, it seems as though most Westerners these days are so intellectually dependent that they need some kind of conceptual framework to point beyond the conceptual domain altogether. And that's essentially what this video is. It's full of concepts, but I'm making it a point to mention that none of the concepts expressed are exclusively the absolute truth in and of themselves. They're pointing to something beyond themselves. They're concepts that are not indulged in themselves as being true concepts. You may have asked at some point, if non-duality is all-inclusive, then why do I hear people say things like, I am not the body? That sounds contradictory, because if it's all-inclusive, it would include the body, right? Well, it's inclusive of the concept of a body, but strictly speaking, there isn't a body. A body is just another name that's referring to a particular distinction. So when a non-dualist or an Advaitin says, I am not the body, what they mean is they are not that concept of a body. That the concept of a body doesn't absolutely exist in order for that to be included. There's simply what is, and that might include particular distinctions, but you can't include something that doesn't exist. So the body as a separate thing, it doesn't have any substantial existence to be included. And if there are any questions that you have about this, feel free to drop them in the comments below, and I'll do my best at elaborating.